There's a specific sound a door makes when someone is using their whole body to block it, not just standing in front of it, a kind of tense, deliberate silence in the wood itself, like the house knows something bad is about to happen before you do. I heard that silence the night my stepfather planted himself in front of our front door and told me I wasn't leaving that room until I gave him what he wanted. My name is Nadia Brooks, and I was 23 years old the night I learned exactly how far a man could stretch the word family to justify taking something that was never his. My grandmother, Odell Brooks, had passed away 11 days earlier, and the grief was still sitting in my chest like a stone I hadn't figured out how to carry properly yet. She'd raised me for the first 9 years of my life while my mother, Sharita, worked 2 jobs trying to keep us afloat, and when my mother finally remarried when I was 14, Grandma Odell had been the one constant that never wavered, never changed, never once made me feel like an inconvenience in my own life. My stepfather, Terrence Wade, had married my mother 9 years earlier, charming in the beginning the way certain men are charming right up until the moment they no longer need to be. He never physically raised a hand to me, and for a long time I told myself that meant something, that it meant he was one of the good ones. I understand now that cruelty doesn't always need fists to leave permanent marks. The night everything changed, I'd just come from the reading of my grandmother's will, still in the black dress I'd worn to sit across from her lawyer, a meticulous woman named Constance Farrell, and hear words I hadn't fully processed yet. That Grandma Odell had left me her house, her modest but carefully tended investment portfolio, and a small business she'd built from nothing over 4 decades, a total inheritance worth just under $600,000. I walked through my mother's front door that night, still holding the folder Constance had given me, and Terrence was standing in the entryway waiting, his broad frame filling the doorway behind me like he'd been rehearsing the moment. "We need to talk," he said, "about what you're going to do with your grandmother's money." I didn't know yet that by the end of that conversation, he'd be blocking the only exit from that house, telling me I had exactly one choice to make before morning. I had no idea I already had a better one. To understand why Terrence felt entitled to a dead woman's inheritance, you have to understand the slow, patient architecture of control he'd built in our house over 9 years, brick by invisible brick. It started small, the way these things always do. He managed the household finances so your mother doesn't have to worry about it, which meant, in practice, that every dollar flowing through that house passed through his hands first. He'd insisted, when I got my first part-time job at 16, that I contribute to household expenses, a request that felt reasonable at the time and only later, looking back, revealed itself as the first thread in a much larger net. My mother, God love her, had spent 9 years slowly shrinking herself around Terrence's moods, the way water shrinks to fit whatever container it's poured into. She'd been strong once, fiercely so, back when it was just the 2 of us before Grandma Odell stepped in and before Terrence arrived. I used to wonder, quietly, painfully, where that woman had gone. Grandma Odell had never liked Terrence, though she'd been too gracious to say so outright in front of my mother. She'd say things instead, careful, coded things, during our Sunday visits. "You keep your own money somewhere he doesn't know about, baby. A woman should always have a door only she can open." I didn't fully understand what she meant until years later, sitting in Constance Farrell's office listening to the terms of a will my grandmother had apparently updated just 8 months before her death, an update Constance mentioned almost in passing, made shortly after a visit where Grandma Odell had asked pointed questions about protecting things properly. I hadn't thought much of that detail at the time. I would think about it constantly in the weeks that followed. Terrence had never openly discussed my grandmother's money before her death, not directly, though I'd caught him asking my mother pointed questions about what Odell was planning to leave behind more than once over the past year, questions my mother always deflected with visible discomfort. I didn't know, walking through that front door with Constance's folder tucked under my arm, that Terrence had already spent the 11 days since Grandma Odell's death quietly researching exactly how much her estate might be worth, and quietly deciding exactly how much of it he believed belonged, by some invisible right, to him. I was about to find out just how far he was willing to go to collect it. Are you enjoying the story? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying it so far, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because believe me, this story is only getting started. Now, let's get back into it. What exactly do you mean? Talk about what I'm going to do with it. I asked, standing in the entryway, still holding Constance's folder against my chest like a shield I didn't know I'd need yet. Terrence's expression stayed calm, controlled, the same tone he used when he wanted something and hadn't yet decided whether charm or pressure would get him there faster. Your mother and I have put a roof over your head for 9 years, Nadia. 9 years of school clothes, groceries, this house you're standing in right now. I think it's only fair that some of what Odell left behind goes toward paying that back. Paying it back, I repeated slowly. Like I'm a debt. Like your family, he corrected, though the distinction felt paper-thin even as he said it. Family helps family. That's all I'm asking. My mother appeared in the hallway behind him then, her arms wrapped around herself in a way I recognized instantly, the posture of a woman bracing for a storm she'd learned long ago not to interrupt. Terrence, maybe we should let her process everything first. It's only been. This isn't complicated, Sharita, he said, without even turning to look at her, and something about the ease with which he silenced her, the practiced quality of it, told me this wasn't the first time. I looked at my mother, silently pleading with her the way I once pleaded with Julian at that dinner table years before I'd ever meet him, except this wasn't Julian's story, this was mine, and my mother's eyes slid away from mine the same way. Apologetic and helpless, unwilling or unable to intervene. What exactly are you asking for? I said finally, keeping my voice as level as I could manage. Terrence's answer came fast, like he'd rehearsed it. Half of the house's value. A portion of the investment portfolio, reasonable, nothing greedy. And full oversight of the business until we're sure you know what you're doing with it. Full oversight. Of my grandmother's business. The one she'd built from nothing, the one she'd specifically, deliberately, updated her will to protect 8 months before her death. That's not happening, I said. Terrence's calm expression flickered, just slightly, the first crack in 9 years of careful control. I don't think you understand your position here, he said quietly, and something in his tone shifted the temperature of the entire room. I didn't know yet how literally he meant that. I was about to find out. My position, I said carefully, is that this is my inheritance from my grandmother, and I haven't even had time to process losing her yet, and you're standing in this hallway asking me to sign over control of everything she built. Your position, Terrence said, his voice dropping into something colder, something I'd never heard directed at me before, is that you're 23 years old, living under my roof. With no house of your own to go to and no plan beyond whatever fantasy Odell filled your head with. That's your position. The words landed harder than I expected, old insecurities I thought I'd outgrown flaring back to life in my chest. But underneath the sting, something else was rising too, a clarity I'd been building without fully realizing it, seeded over years of Sunday visits and Grandma Odell's careful, coded warnings. I have somewhere to go, I said, surprising myself with how steady the words came out. Terrence's eyebrows rose slightly. Do you now? I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I turned toward the stairs, intending to go pack a bag, needing distance from that entryway and the pressure radiating off him like heat off summer asphalt. That's when he moved to block the door. Not the stairs, the front door, the only exit from that house, positioning his broad frame directly in front of it with a stillness that felt more threatening than if he'd shouted. You're not walking out of here with an attitude and no plan, he said. Here's how tonight is going to go. You call that lawyer first thing tomorrow morning, you sign over control of the business and half the estate, and we put all of this behind us like family does. Or, he paused, letting the silence stretch deliberately, you pack your bags right now and you get out of my house tonight, and you figure out on your own exactly how far you get without the roof I've been putting over your head for 9 years. My mother made a small, strangled sound from the hallway, but she still didn't step forward. I stood there in that entryway, my grandmother's folder pressed against my chest, my stepfather's body blocking the only door out of a house that had never, not once in 9 years, actually felt like it belonged to me. And for the first time since Grandma Odell died, I felt something other than grief. I felt certain. Okay, I said quietly. I'll pack my bags. I want you to understand something about the 15 minutes that followed, because they've stayed with me more vividly than almost any other memory of that entire year. I walked past Terence, who stepped aside just enough to let me pass, smug satisfaction already settling into his expression, clearly certain he'd just won. My mother followed me partway up the stairs, whispering my name, asking me to just wait, just think about it, just give it a few days. I have thought about it, I told her, pulling my old suitcase from the closet, my hands steadier than I expected them to be. I've been thinking about it since Grandma Odell sat me down 8 months ago and told me exactly what to do if a night like this ever happened. My mother went very still in the doorway. What do you mean? I didn't answer right away. I finished packing, folding clothes with a kind of mechanical calm that surprised even me, while 8-month-old memories surfaced clearly for the first time in weeks. Grandma Odell, sitting across from me at her kitchen table on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she never actually drank, telling me she'd had a feeling lately and wanted to make sure a few things were settled properly. She'd asked me pointed questions that day about Terence, about how the household really worked, about whether I ever felt like I had a place that was truly, unquestionably mine. I hadn't thought much of that conversation at the time. I understood now it had been the beginning of something she'd been quietly building on my behalf for months. Grandma set some things up, I told my mother finally, zipping my suitcase closed. Things Terence doesn't know about. Things that mean tonight doesn't actually go the way he thinks it does. My mother's face shifted through confusion, then something that looked almost like fear, though I couldn't yet tell whether that fear was for me or for the life she'd built with a man I was quickly realizing she might have been protecting herself from for years, not just me. Nadia, please, she whispered. Where will you even go? I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I loved despite everything, this woman who'd shrunk herself into someone I barely recognized over 9 years of marriage. Somewhere Terence can't block the door, I said quietly. I carried my suitcase downstairs, past my stepfather standing in the entryway with his arms crossed, already savoring what he believed was a victory. I walked out into the night without looking back, carrying far more than he understood. Here is what Terence Wade didn't know, standing in that entryway congratulating himself on driving me out of his house. 8 months before her death, Grandma Odell hadn't just rewritten her will. She'd also, quietly, methodically, transferred the deed of a second property, a small, unassuming rental house 2 towns over that she'd owned outright for over a decade. One Terence had never known existed because Grandma Odell had never once mentioned it in front of him, directly into a trust in my name, structured specifically so that it would remain entirely separate from the estate, untouchable by any will contest or family dispute. A door only you can open, she'd told me that Sunday afternoon, sliding a small folder across her kitchen table, just in case that man ever shows you who he really is before I'm around to shield you from it. I'd cried reading through that folder 8 months earlier, moved by my grandmother's foresight, never imagining I'd actually need to use it. I understood now, walking away from my mother's house with a suitcase in one hand and Constance Farrell's folder in the other, exactly how much my grandmother had seen coming long before I did. I drove to that small rental house that night, a modest 2-bedroom with a leaking faucet and slightly dated wallpaper, and it was, without question, the most beautiful place I'd ever walked into in my entire life, because for the first time in 9 years, I was standing inside 4 walls that belonged to me completely, that no one could block me from, that no one could stand in front of and demand entry to on their own terms. I called Constance Farrell first thing the next morning, my voice steadier than I expected after a mostly sleepless night on an unfamiliar mattress. He wants control of the business, I told her, and half the estate. He blocked the door and told me to transfer everything or leave. Constance was quiet for a moment. And what did you tell him? I left, I said. But I want to know exactly what my grandmother built to protect this. I want to understand every single piece of it before I do anything else. Good, Constance said, and I could hear something like approval in her voice. Because your grandmother built quite a bit more than a will, Nadia. I think it's time you saw all of it. I had no idea, sitting in that unfamiliar kitchen with morning light slanting through slightly dated curtains, just how much more there was. Constance's office felt different this second time I sat across from her desk, less like grief, more like discovery. The folder she slid toward me this time thicker than the one from the initial reading. "Your grandmother didn't just leave you money and property," Constance said, opening the folder to a page dense with legal language I had to read twice to fully absorb. 8 months ago, she restructured the business entirely. It's no longer a simple sole proprietorship. She converted it into a trust-held entity, with you as the sole beneficiary and a built-in provision that automatically triggers additional protections if any family member attempts to claim ownership or control through pressure, coercion, or what the language here calls undue domestic influence. Undue domestic influence, I repeated slowly. She used almost those exact words when she came to me 8 months ago, Constance said. She told me, and I remember this clearly because it struck me at the time, that she suspected someone in your household might eventually try to force your hand regarding her estate, and she wanted ironclad protection in place before that ever happened. I sat back in my chair, something between grief and awe washing over me in a wave I hadn't fully anticipated. My grandmother, in her final months, hadn't just been dying quietly and gracefully the way I'd assumed. She'd been watching, calculating, protecting me from a threat she'd apparently identified long before I was willing to see it myself. "There's more," Constance continued. "The provision also includes documentation requirements. If you ever needed to demonstrate that pressure was applied, the trust's terms allow for immediate legal action against anyone attempting to coerce transfer of assets, including the option to pursue damages." "Terrence blocked the front door," I said slowly, the realization building as I spoke. "He told me to transfer everything or get out that night." My mother witnessed the whole thing. Constance's expression sharpened with interest. "Did anyone else witness it? Any messages, any recordings, anything documented?" I thought back to that night, my mind sharpening with a clarity that surprised me. "My phone," I said suddenly. I had my phone in my coat pocket the entire time. I always keep voice memos running when I'm anxious. It's an old habit from grad school. I don't even think I remembered doing it that night, but I pulled out my phone with hands that had started, faintly, to tremble, and there it was, a voice memo, 43 minutes long, time-stamped the exact night Terrence blocked that door. Constance's eyes met mine across the desk. "Nadia," she said quietly, "I think we need to listen to this together." The recording was almost unbearable to listen to at first, hearing my own voice thin and strained against Terrence's controlled, calculating tone, hearing the exact moment he told me to transfer everything or leave, hearing my mother's small, strangled sound of protest that never became actual intervention. But by the end of it, sitting across from Constance in that quiet office, I didn't feel unbearable pain anymore. I felt something closer to power. "This is more than enough," Constance said, turning off the recording, her expression carefully professional, but unable to fully hide her own reaction to what we'd just heard. "Combined with the trust's built-in protections, we have grounds to pursue several things if you want to." "What kind of things?" I asked. "At minimum, we can send formal legal notice making clear that any further attempt to coerce transfer of trust assets will result in immediate legal action, with this recording as documented evidence," Constance said. "We could also pursue a restraining order, given the coercive nature of blocking your only exit from the residence. And if you wanted to go further, there's the option of pursuing damages for emotional distress and attempted coercion." I sat with those options for a long moment, turning them over carefully, feeling the old instinct to minimize, to smooth things over, to protect my mother from consequences even now, warring against a new, harder one instinct that had been growing in me since the night I walked out of that house. "I don't want to destroy my mother's life," I said finally. "I know that might sound naive." "It doesn't," Constance said. "It sounds like someone who understands the difference between protecting herself and needing to burn everything down to do it." We settled on the formal legal notice, precise and unambiguous, laying out exactly what evidence existed and exactly what consequences would follow any further attempt to pressure me. Constance sent it that same week, and I spent the following days in my grandmother's small rental house, slowly making it feel like mine, painting over the dated wallpaper. fixing the leaking faucet myself with a video tutorial and more patience than I expected to have. I didn't hear from Terrence directly after that notice went out. I heard from my mother instead, 3 days later, her voice small and uncertain over the phone in a way that broke something open in my chest all over again. "He's furious," she said. "He says you're trying to destroy this family over money." "No," I said quietly. "I'm trying to protect what Grandma Odell built, and myself, from a man who blocked a door and called that family." The silence on the other end of that call stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. "I think," my mother finally whispered, "I need to think about some things too." 3 weeks passed before I heard from my mother again, and when I did, it wasn't a phone call. It was her, standing on the front step of my small rental house, a single suitcase beside her, her eyes red-rimmed, but steady in a way I hadn't seen in years. "I left him," she said, before I could even fully process the sight of her standing there. 3 days ago. "I've been staying with your Aunt Rosalind since." I stood in that doorway for a long moment, feeling old anger and old love collide painfully in my chest, unsure which one would win. "Why no?" I asked finally. My mother's hands twisted together in front of her, an old nervous habit I remembered from long before Terrence ever entered our lives. "I listened to your recording. Constance sent it to me, with your permission," she said. "I sat in my car outside your aunt's house and listened to the whole thing, and Nadia, I heard myself in it. That small, strangled sound I made instead of actually helping you. I've been making that sound for 9 years, and I never let myself really hear it until I heard it played back to me." I let her inside, made 2 cups of tea in a kitchen that finally, fully, felt like mine, and we sat at my small table while she told me pieces of 9 years I'd never fully understood from her side, the small controls that had built slowly into total ones. The moments she'd wanted to intervene and found herself unable to, the way fear, applied patiently enough over enough years, can convince even a strong woman that her own voice no longer belongs to her. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right away," she said. "I know I have a lot to make up for. I just needed you to know I finally heard it. I finally heard myself." I thought about Grandma Odell, about her careful, coded warnings over the years, about the trust she'd quietly built to protect a granddaughter she suspected might someday need protecting from a threat closer to home than either of us wanted to admit. I thought about how she'd never lived to see this moment, my mother sitting in a kitchen that belonged to me, finally, painfully, choosing herself. "I'm glad you finally heard it," I told my mother honestly. "It's going to take time for the rest. But I'm glad you're here." We sat together in comfortable, healing silence, 2 cups of tea slowly going cold between us, the beginning of something neither of us fully understood yet, but both of us, for the first time in a long time, actually wanted. It's been 2 years now since the night Terrence Wade blocked a door and told me to choose between everything my grandmother built and the only home I'd known for 9 years. The business Grandma Odell left behind has grown under my leadership, doubling in size, expanding into 2 additional locations, built on the same patient, careful foundation she always taught me to value. The small rental house is fully mine now, wallpaper replaced, faucet fixed, filled with furniture and photographs and a life that belongs entirely, unquestionably, to me. My mother lives 20 minutes away now, in a small apartment she chose entirely on her own, rebuilding a version of herself I'm slowly getting to know again, the strong woman Grandma Odell always insisted was still in there somewhere, buried under 9 years of careful, patient shrinking. Terrence contested the trust once, briefly, through a lawyer who quickly advised him against pursuing it further once Constance presented the recording and the ironclad protections my grandmother had built months before her death. He hasn't contacted either of us since. I understand he moved out of state eventually, though I've made a point of not tracking the details too closely. Some doors, once closed, deserve to stay that way. I visit Grandma Odell's grave every Sunday now, the same day we used to sit together at her kitchen table, and I tell her about the business, about my mother, about the small rental house with its dated wallpaper now gone. I tell her I finally understand what she meant, all those years ago, about keeping a door only I could open. She was protecting me long before I understood I needed protecting, building something quiet and unbreakable in the background of ordinary Sunday afternoons while I sat across from her, mostly just grateful for her company, never imagining how much foresight lived behind her careful questions. People ask me sometimes what I actually walked away with that night, when Terence stood congratulating himself in that entryway, certain he'd won by driving me out into the dark with nothing but a suitcase. I tell them the truth. I walked away with a door only I could open, a mother who finally found her way back to herself, and proof, undeniable and permanent, that the people who try hardest to control you rarely understand how much protection was quietly built around you long before they ever tried. Terence wanted everything my grandmother left me. He never understood that the most valuable thing she left behind was never something he could have taken at all. The end.